This week on Sprague Woodturning, I finished this monster burl. It's big, folks. It's big. Hi everybody, Jim from Sprague Woodturning. So this week we are turning the monster. And what really probably makes this the monster, I've turned bowls bigger in diameter than this, but the depth is what really makes this certainly the biggest burl that I've turned. I've turned out the pieces of wood that are bigger than this, but not burl. And if you have any experience turning burl, it's not an easy thing to turn. It can be quite dense and hard to work with. So the first thing I want to do, since this turning is so large, and of course it's warped when it was drying, so it's important to actually true this up best we can, and so that we don't lose a lot of thickness off of this, especially since I do plan on putting this on a glue block. So I think it's important to remove as much mass as we can prior to actually doing that. All right, so we're mounted outboard. Just want to point a couple things out before we start. Got a pretty decent crack here, and so I'm hoping to turn the majority of this away so that it's basically non-existent. There's a couple other little spots here, another little one there. I don't know if there was one back here or not. I see a glue run there, so there must have been something here. So we're going to take a lot of the mass out of this bowl, trim it down, and then we'll get a glue block on it. She's a beast. For this week's project, we pretty much just stick to the 5/8 bowl gouge by David Ellsworth. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't think that I actually use any of the Hunter tools this week. Again, if I've got an all wood project, I will always use a bowl gouge over a carbide scraper. I mean, that's in my roots. That's where I came from. I'm really comfortable with the bowl gouge, where a lot of people I realize are not, and that's where scrapers, of course, can be a big aid to them. But I've said it once before, I've said it 100 times. If you're going to be a wood turner, you got to learn to use the bowl gouge. So this burl, like most burls, is predominantly end grain. So when you're roughing out burls and they're green, where they've been just cut off the tree, then they're a lot easier to work with than when it's dry. Dried end grain burl is typically not a joy to joy to turn. So, but of course, you can't really argue with the results that Mother Nature gives you. These burls, of course, are highly sought after. This one, believe it or not, was dropped off on my doorstep. I asked the guy what he wanted for it, and he said nothing. He says, I just wanted to see it being used. So this bowl is the largest piece of a coring video that I did. I believe it's called Coring the Monster. I'd have to, anyway, I will link that at the end of this video if you want to actually see the whole thing. This is a real-time clip, push cut with the flutes pretty much straight up. And that's pretty much the speed that you see me going at. When I get up near the rim, I will slow down, probably twice as fast as what I was going before. That way you don't push off the end and have a lot of chip out off the very top of the bark. The other thing I will do, the bark will come off this piece eventually. That was the plan from the start. But if the bark is damaged and I know that it's coming off, I typically will turn the bowl to its thickness and then remove the bark. Reason for that is that push cut on the outside of the bowl, or a pull cut like I'm doing there on the inside of the bowl. Like I said earlier, you can actually get some pretty nasty tear out and chip out at the very top of the bowl. And you don't want that. I mean, it's not going to look good. If the bark's coming off, it can be corrected quite easily through sanding, but I prefer to do that. That way, if there's any chipping of anything, it's going to be the bark and not the wood. So I've got my tool rest base in as far as I can. That is a 15-inch tool rest. And even at that, I'm having a real tough time. If you look at the overhang from that gouge from where the tool rest is, you can see the gouge dipping. And it's a fight to try and keep the thing from catching and diving down. So, it's not an easy thing to do. It's hard on your body. I find it's hard on your body anyway. Maybe doing this for 20 years will do that to you. But this is the real big difference between a bowl gouge and a spindle gouge. A bowl gouge doesn't have a tang that you would see on a spindle roughing gouge. A spindle roughing gouge, if you try to use it in this setting, there's a good chance that the tool can actually break in half, and then you've got this big piece of metal flying through the air, which you really don't want to do. I have seen some other people try and turn bowls with spindle gouges. Never, never do that. If you do, you run the risk of being seriously hurt. Right there, I just kind of showed how far the overhang is with that. And this is a pretty robust gouge. This isn't a small gouge. And I should mention the difference between a bowl gouge and a spindle roughing gouge is the fact that it's 5/8 of an inch of steel going down into the handle on a bowl gouge. Whereas, like I said, on a spindle roughing gouge, it's actually just a tang, which can break off easily. So, these are a pain to make, but man, do they make beautiful, beautiful turnings. So it's worth the pain and anguish. The great thing about an end grain burl like this is that you can actually use the gouge on its side. And I will typically do that on the inside up near the rim, right there, just like that. And as long as it's fresh off the grinder, it usually will work quite well. So it's finally time to remove the bark. As you can see, we still got some pretty decent thickness here, but at least things are trued up and they're round. We've gotten rid of a lot of mass. So again, just using a flat tip screwdriver as opposed to um, a chisel. Don't want any dig ins. I like to do this at this point because I can look for cracks up near the rim. A lot of times you can't see that. So what I will do is I will sand the rim with 60 grit, and that's the initial sanding on the rim. Then later on, I'll go through higher grits as I'm kind of doing the sanding process. And if the bark had been intact on this piece, I certainly would have left it. Um, I know it's a very rustic look, but I typically do it on most of my burls as long as the bark is intact. Just taking another pass here just to make sure that, we've got things down a little thinner than what it is now. Um, be aware that when you're working on turnings this large that they can move as you're actually turning them. This one was in my kiln for a week prior to it going onto my lathe, and there was no movement out of it. So since this is such a large turning, I figured that I would put a large glue block on the bottom of it. I typically don't put them on this big, so I thought I would film this, and I just put little grooves in it, just a little bit of added area for the glue to adhere to. I want to use a drill bit to try and center this piece. So that's what I'm doing here, just drilling a hole through the center of this, and then I'm going to dip the glue block into the hot melt glue. You can see there's a hole at the base of the bowl for the drill bit to line up with. And this method usually works quite well. Sometimes it doesn't work, but this time worked pretty good. All right, so after getting the glue block on, here's what we're dealing with. If I had to guess, we're probably going to lose about 1/4 of an inch off the overall size. That's all right. This thing is still 3/4 of an inch thick up at the rim. Of course, you won't have as much down at the bottom that you'll have to remove. So, you know, that ain't bad on a bowl that's 16 inches in diameter. Here you'll notice that when I get right up by that rim that I really slow down. That clip is the same speed as it was when I was back further on the bowl. Again, you know, you can go from the top of the bowl into the base on the outside, but I typically find that it's easier to come um, from the small part of the bowl out to the rim. It just gives me a better cut, so that's why I prefer to do it that way. So I'm just cutting in a little area so that I can ride the bevel all the way down in the bowl. Once I've got that area established, then of course you can put the flutes of the gouge straight up in the air and then go into the base of the bowl. Until you've got that little shoulder for the bevel to ride on, you can't do it. So that crack didn't disappear. I could have just put clear CA glue on it. When the client was here kind of looking at the bowl, we figured that if there was going to be any filling that it would be maybe a red resin or a gold resin. So I decided to go with red. That's a good contrasting color. So, but I don't want any resin bleeding to happen. So that's why I'm putting the tape on the surface and then just cutting away the yeah, the tape where the crack is. And hopefully we're not going to have any resin staining. All right, I've got some Fast Cure from Designer Epoxy and Pearl Red. I did mix up a little bit of the red coral and it just, I don't know, it's not doing it for me. So I'm just going to drop this in here, and then as this fills up, I'll bring the tape up and seal it off, and then I'll do it on the inside. I debated on doing a natural inlay with the red coral, but when I added it with the CA glue, it just was kind of too pinky for me. So that's why I went with the red resin. Flip it around, we'll do the inside. That's about the best I can do for you. Well, there you go. That's it for me today. We'll let that sit overnight, and we will carry on with this tomorrow. It was actually quite a fight to get the duct tape off the outside of this bowl. It comes off quite easily on the inside, but it was put up quite a fight on the outside. So here I am, you know, with this small amount of resin here, a gouge is perfectly fine for this. It's not going to really take the edge off of it all that much. So that's why I've stuck with the gouge. And you know, you can see there's pretty decent shavings coming off there. And you know, again, this is dry, hard burl. And so if you're pulling shavings off like that with a sharp gouge, that's exactly what they should look like. So just overnight, this bowl actually moved a little bit, and this is normal. It's nothing to be concerned about. When I was in full production, what I typically would do, I've got 25 face plates. I would put 25 bowls on those face plates, those waste blocks that you see, and I would trim each of these pieces. When wood dries, wood has tension built up in it. So when you trim it, a lot of times that bowl will continue to move afterwards because it's still releasing a lot of the tension that's in it. So what I would do is trim them all, fix any major flaws, and I mean really big flaws, leave the smaller ones for when I do the final turning. So, by the time I work back to the first one, typically a lot of that tension was gone and you were able to finish the bowl and it wouldn't move. So I just put pencil marks all near the natural edge up there, and the reason for that is when I was bringing the gouge off there, it, I thought that I was hitting all the way around, but I wasn't sure. And because you're turning in an area where there's wood and then there's air and then there's wood, it's hard to tell if you're really hitting all the way around. So a good thing to do here is just take a pencil and put it. You could put it all over the bowl if you want to, and typically it's not an issue where there's solid wood because you can hear the constant noise coming off the gouge. But up near the top where the natural edge is, it's sometimes hard to know if you've got it or not. So anyway, give it a try. It works very effectively for me, and it will certainly help when it comes to sanding as well, because if you miss those areas, then you're going to have issues when you're sanding. So, of course, everything has to be round prior to sanding. So, give it a try if you're having some issues. So, that tape come off a lot easier, that's for sure. You'll see here in a moment that I actually do the same thing with the pencil on the inside again. Uh, a lot of times you can stand back and kind of see the shadow of it, but when it's getting really close, not so much. All right, we are finally to the sanding stage. I'll start at 60 grit and go all the way to 320. And I'll make sure that I hold on to all the pieces of sandpaper because I'll probably have to use at least 2 of each grit to get through this. This is a really big bowl and it's hard. So it's pretty clean. There's a couple of areas where there's a bit of tear out, but for working so far off the tool rest, it's not too bad at all, really. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing, and I'll record how long it takes to do all the sanding on this piece to give you an idea of how long it takes to sand something like this. So as you can see, it's quite a dusty affair. That's with a 3 horsepower double bag dust collector going as well. So if you're not using a respirator of some sort, I really do highly recommend getting one. You definitely don't want to damage your lungs. So I sand it to 180, and then now I'm cleaning up the rim. If you remember, initially it was 60, now I'm at 180, and then I'll sand all the way to 320 and then sand the rim at 320 as well. And then we will be pretty much ready for finish. And lastly, just a little bit of hand sanding at the rim to break that sharp edge. All right, if you're curious, that took 75 minutes to completely sand the inside and the outside and do the rim, and it took 16 sanding discs. I do find that when you're sanding, keep in mind that you're sanding burl here, which is not an easy thing to do, and it's pretty much all end grain as well, which is not all that pleasant to sand either. So, you know, I typically buy more of the 60 grit and the 320 grit than I do of the rest of the grits, because cutting back this surface with the 60 grit is probably the most important thing. Just getting any little bits of tear out that are there, removing those, and just kind of blending things all in so you don't feel any, you know, lumps in your work. Again, that's really going to depend on your tool work. Anyway, that's pretty typical of what it takes for to sand something like this size and this type of wood. All right, so finish. We are going to use Waterlux, and I've got pretty much a full Dixie cup of it, and I might even need more than this. We'll have to see. So this is the first coat of Waterlux. Now I was very surprised that it actually it only used about a half a cup of this. If this was, say, just a straight up maple bowl, then it probably would have absorbed more. But because it's burl and it's denser than normal woods, that's probably why it didn't take as much finish. Still, I thought that it was going to take a lot more than that, just simply because it's pretty much all end grain. All right, there it is. What a beast, man. This is something, it's hard to even really kind of hold on to and show you here. It's not light. I'm just trying to find the inlay spot on the outside here so we can look at that. There's the inlay spot. I should say where the spot where the resin is. Inside it's pretty much absorbed most of the finish that I put on there. That's all right. We will do the second coat tomorrow. Good morning. So this time, instead of using the buffing system, let's try the 4-0 steel wool to see what kind of finish that gives us with the Waterlux. All right, this is the second coat of Waterlux Original VOC. This coat and the third coat are going to be the most important coats. So, you know, you got to go evenly across the surface. You cannot put too much finish on, because if you do, you're going to have runs and sags. So, without further ado, I do find with these wings that it's pretty hard to put the finish on evenly. So a lot of times I'll just shut the lathe off right out near the natural edge on these pieces and then just wipe it on. I don't know if you also noticed that I didn't, where I ended and then loaded my rag again, I didn't start at that same spot. I started a little bit off and moved my way in, and that way you don't have a real heavy spot where you first go back to where the first time you applied it. You can certainly get some runs there. That looks pretty good. I do find, and a lot of times the dead center of the bowl, you'll get kind of a little bare spot. So a lot of times I'll just kind of do this number, and then once that's on there, I don't typically go right over the center. I just go all the way from, you know, a little bit past center all the way to the rim. And of course I always do the rim last. And the reason for that is because as you're putting the finish on the inside, it may wrap around the edge, and same thing on the outside. And then that way, just clean off the very rim of the bowl and you are good to go. There you go, 2 coats. I mean, it looks good. I'm going to put 3 on it because the owner of this bowl tells me that they are going to be using it for function. So I want to make sure that it's got some really good protection on there. Not a ton of chatoyance in it, but there's a bit right there. She's a beast. All right, so I'll do the 3rd coat the same way, and we'll see you at the end when we're doing the foot. All right, it is time to cut this beast off. Do the foot. Getting ready to part the piece off of the waste block. I could have gone in deeper with the parting tool, but I decided against it. Still a fair bit of mass there, so I don't want that to break off. If this was a normal bowl, then I probably could have just cut it down and then given it a smack, and that straight grain will break off usually pretty nicely. But in this case, you could rip it out of the bottom of the bowl, and you don't want to do that. Whew. It's tough cutting that stuff by hand. All right, so here we are. We're going to do the very bottom of the bowl. I was a little concerned. I thought that maybe the upper natural edge of that bowl might hit against the headstock, but it didn't, so I was happy about that. So I've got it on my homemade vacuum chuck, and you know, it certainly does what it's intended to do, but I'm taking pretty light cuts here, and oh man, it would be absolutely devastating to have that come off the vacuum chuck right now. Just like the rest of the bowl, a 3.5-inch dipple disc here. I'm sanding from 60 to 320. There's a Richard Braffin spear point, just to give the foot a little decoration. All right, so before we talk about this week's project, I've got a couple letters this week. I think last week too. This one comes from Mick from Mick's Woodworkings. He's in the USA. He has Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So thanks a lot for sending your card along. I'll be sure to put that up on my fridge.
And I'll link, I'll put all of his details in the description down below, so please check him out. Next one comes from Tyus Stark. Cool sticker. He also sent me this awesome mug. Thank you so much. I will put that to good use in the mornings. Again, he has Facebook, Instagram, YouTube channel as well, and Made Me. I don't know what that is. Is that a UK platform maybe? Anyway, I will put all of his details in the description down below as well, so check them out. All right, so the bowl itself. The beast. I mean, this thing is huge. Like, it is absolutely massive. And you know, it was a real challenge to make. There's the very bottom. Still needs 2 coats of finish on the very bottom, then it will be done. Not so much a challenge in the diameter, but the depth of it. So this is 16 inches across and 8 inches tall. And so, you know, working off the tool rest that far is kind of hard on the body. And, you know, to be quite honest with you, there's a lot of lathes that probably can't handle anything like this. Beautiful pieces of resin in it here. Let me see if I can see what I'm doing here. Chatoyance is nice. Not a ton of it, but still absolutely beautiful. I think it ended up being 3/8 of an inch in thickness. That's probably where we ended up. I didn't actually measure it, but that's what it looks like. I'll set this down because it's so big. So 3 coats of Waterlux. Again, Waterlux seems to cover probably better than the other finishes that I've used in the past. The one that I'm working on now, a different one from this, you know, I probably could have gotten away with two coats. So the Waterlux original VOC and the medium sheen is what we used on this. You know, so far so good. I'm really liking that product, and as far as I'm concerned, I'll probably stick with that moving forward in the future. So we have hit over 40,000 subscribers. I mean, thank you so much. It still baffles me a bit that I have that many, but I'm not ready to make the 40,000 subscriber goal. Kind of caught me with my pants down. This past week, I gained almost 1,200 subscribers in a week, which is, I mean, that's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I've got my production schedule set. I've got another bowl, a resin wood combo coming up next week, and then the week after that we will do the 40,000 subscriber giveaway bowl. So please keep commenting, because that's where we're going to pick. We're going to pick from the comments to get the winner on, you know, each of the videos. We'll pick a name, and then those names will all go into a hat, and whatever name we pull, that's going to be the winner. So anyway, thank you so much for subscribing, and thank you so much for commenting and liking my videos and sharing my videos on your social media platforms. It is awesome. Thank you so much. All right, well, that's it. Next week, like I said, we're going to do another resin and wood combo bowl, and it's looking pretty nice. I'll say that right now. Well, that's it. Take care, stay safe, don't forget that bell, and please share with your friends. See you next week.